Tower of Fantasy's global revenue exceeds $34 million within the first 2 weeks. Open world RPG Tower of Fantasy, released by Level Infinite on August 11th, has seen an initial success in revenue globally. The game set a record for the highest revenue growth rate in Japan within the first 2 weeks, August 11th through 24th, according to a report by Sensor Tower. Meanwhile, its worldwide revenue exceeded $34 million, a report said. That was the month that Tower of Fantasy released globally. Fans of the game were claiming this was indicative of its future success, and were under the delusion that the game would go on to contest Genshin Impact, which really wasn't helped by the studio themselves marketing the game as a direct competitor to Genshin Impact. Nevertheless, these earnings were absolutely incredible, there's no denying that, making more than almost any other gacha release during its first month this year. Then, month 2 happened. Tower of Fantasy made over $24 million this month on the App Store and the Play Store. That makes sense. The honeymoon phase for the game was over. Many players had spent money that they wouldn't continue to spend after either acquiring the husbandos and the waifus that they were after, or having quit the game altogether. A 20-30% decline over its first month isn't bad by any stretch of the imagination. But over the last month, month 3 specifically, earnings should have spiked, right? With the release of 2.0, featuring the critically acclaimed Vera region, new characters to roll to obtain. This was argued by many to be the savior of the game, the single update that really turned everything around. If you didn't like Tower of Fantasy before, you definitely will after this. Don't worry, there may have been a few bugs before, but 2.0 will be completely different. Yet, here we are. Tower of Fantasy rakes in $6 million in October. Despite the touted 2.0 patch, Steam launch has also been a failure with only 3,000 players. And you know what, just let me stop right there. Yes, those numbers are low for a Steam game, but the Steam numbers are no way indicative of the overall player base, as many players likely continue to play the game via the official launcher. But there's no denying that a decline from $34 million to $24 million to $6 million over a several month period is very bad. Before we jump into this video though, I do want to thank all of our incredible patrons over on Patreon. You guys do not need to support Mrs. Stix and I, but you still choose to, and trust me, it is appreciated beyond anything I can convey verbally. You guys are incredible, and admittedly, if you have a moment, follow Mrs. Stix and I over on Twitter. We'd really appreciate that. Scrolling through feedback on social media, I came across a thread that kind of summarized exactly what's going wrong with the game right now. Aside from the talks of revenue, the number of players isn't looking so good either. I played Tower of Fantasy on launch up until the Nemesis banner ended. Managed to pull her a couple of hours before the timer expired and quit. Came back about a week before 2.0, but the game hasn't gotten any better, to be honest. Played a bit of 2.0 only to quit again. Bugs and dev incompetence is still a thing. Story, although slightly better, leaves a lot to be desired. Events are awful, not to mention the gachapon events. And admittedly, one of the most glaring issues with Tower of Fantasy has been mishandling of, well, pretty much everything. Hackers have continued to run rampant. Yeah, sure, they've banned the odd hacker here and there, hundreds probably in total, but out of millions of players and thousands of hackers, this is in no way sufficient. Exploit abusers are common in every form of gameplay. The devs have absolutely no idea what they're doing with this game and have single-handedly run any chance of it being a success into the ground. From what I can tell, the consensus seems to be that free players that have been saving for Lin will also quit if Tower of Fantasy is not in a better state by then. You might think, so who cares? But you have to remember that Tower of Fantasy branded itself as an MMO, as bare bones as it is compared to the real ones, Final Fantasy XIV, World of Warcraft, Guild Wars 2, old school RuneScape, etc. Tower of Fantasy has had dead servers for months now, and people are constantly complaining about the team play aspect when grouping with other players. Player numbers are essential for MMOs, and especially for servers and content that require group play. Even if all of the players were consolidated into one mega server for each region, the issues I stated above will still persist. Bugs, dev incompetence, average story awful events / gachapon events, players complaining about team play, etc. And this This is very true. I do not play Tower Fantasy anymore. I played periodically for the first month, but I got bored with the gated content and having to redo everything that I already accomplished during the beta test. But almost every single person that I know, hundreds on our Discord, have quit the game. The few that remain have continued to discuss how dead every area of the game is and how it's almost impossible for them to, on their server specifically, find people to run content with. Tower Fantasy is a gorgeous game with fantastic combat and some great looking husbandos and waifus, but this game never stood a chance, unfortunately. I thought it would after playing the beta, but the devs, not the publisher, Level Infinite, the devs are amateurs with absolutely no talent. Hopefully, the art department and staff that worked on gameplay moved to a more competent studio under Tencent, because Hada just ain't it. This is a major L for this game. Now, if Tower Fantasy isn't your thing, I got you covered with 2 videos on screen right now. One featuring every gacha confirmed to be releasing this month, and another featuring a breakout hit that nobody ever expected.